right. Welcome everybody to Tech Tuesday, or as Rachel calls it, Tech Time with Isaac Schaefer. Thanks for joining everybody. So today we're going to talk about the changes coming to a lot of forms relating to commission, Legal Bulletin 222. So this does not take effect until October 3rd, 2022, but some important changes coming. I think I'm going to share my screen. Okay, y'all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. I'm not going to go through and read all this, but I would encourage everybody to check this out. Again, Legal Bulletin 222. If you don't have time to read all this, at least go through these form changes. So I'm going to do my best to summarize, and then we're going to go through. I'm going to show you the changes in the form. As always, I think these meetings are always better if they're more like open form. So a lot of what I'm doing here is subjective, not subjective, but me interpreting. So if you have comments or questions, feel free to speak up, and don't worry about interrupting me. Just unmute yourself and speak up. Also, just a reminder, I'm a managing broker. I've been the designated broker here. But if you have a question about something really specific to an offer you're writing, you're like, am I allowed to do this? You can call me and I'm able to give you my opinion. But technically now, because I'm not the managing broker, it's just my opinion. So if you want a firm yes, this is allowed according to your managing broker, just a reminder to go to Kim, because she's the one who has to give the absolute okay. Now, you don't need the okay on most stuff you do day to day. We already know yes or no, but if it's something really specific, I might say, yeah, this is how I interpret it, but you want to get Kim's permission on that. So just a reminder there. Okay, let's jump in. So quick summary, what they're doing here, we've had meetings about this in the past. There have been a lot of lawsuits recently about accusing MLSs and big real estate companies and real estate brokers of price fixing, where you essentially are telling the seller they have to pay the buyer's office commission, and this is what it's going to be, and not giving the seller a choice. And so what the powers that be are trying to do is make commission be a negotiable term. In my opinion, nothing has really changed, because it has always been negotiable. Maybe in a listing appointment, you don't phrase it that way, but that's really the biggest change here. Now, when you're talking to a seller and when you're talking to a buyer, you have to talk very clearly and precisely about commissions and how you get paid as a buyer's broker and how you get paid as a listing broker. So essentially, they are changing the forms to be more candid and upfront on both the offer forms and the listing forms regarding specifically the buyer's office commission. So the purchase and sale agreement, we'll jump right into that. So as you know, the purchase and sale agreement states stated that whatever is agreed upon in the listing, whatever the listing states as the buyer's office commission compensation or whatever it is, that was contractual, right? Whatever the listing said was the buyer's office commission. You don't have to put that in the listing in your offer, because it is connected to whatever was listed on the Northwest MLS. And when you're using Northwest MLS forms, it was intertwined, right? Now they actually have a blank, which I think is awesome. It says buyer's brokerage firm commission offered in listing pay is this. You type it in, what is it, and you're going to check the box paid as offered, right? So if it was 2.5% and you're happy with 2.5%, you just write 2.5% and you check this box that says we're good with it. Or you can click the second box that says other, see addendum, and this is where you would write 41C, which we're going to talk about in a second, and then put in the percentage. So it puts it right at the front, kind of like on a 22A, there's closing costs. Are they paying any of the buyer's closing costs? Yes or no, and how much? That's what they're doing here. They're just putting it right. It's part of the offer. We're offering $500,000 with a 2.5% commission paid to the buyer's broker. And it's just very clear. And I like that. I don't think that's a problem. So that's what's changed on the form 21. Not too much of a difference. It just puts the commission front and center. Okay, so if a listing has a commission that is 2% or less, or 1% or 0, there's a form you should use. It's called the Form 41C. This is going to pause. This is my opinion. You should always have a conversation with your buyer ahead of time and tell them that I charge 2.5% commission. Generally, the seller pays this, but not always. If the seller does not pay this, we're going to use a Form 41C that indicates that they are going to pay me 2.5%, and that will be reflected in our offer. Is that okay with you? So the 41C is a form that you would use in that situation. So there's a few options. The first option is saying they offered no compensation, right? They had 0 for the buyer's office commission. And you're saying that that's not okay, and you're going to pay me 2.5%, and that's just part of our offer, right? It's kind of like asking for closing costs. You're just saying you're going to pay me 2.5%, even though you said you're not going to pay the buyer's office, and the seller can accept the offer or decline it. But if they accept the offer, they will sign this form. You can say, then the second box is what you do if there is a compensation that is there is compensation, but it's not what you had agreed upon with your buyer. So that would say, okay, they offered me X, they offered in the listing X%, but the buyer's brokerage firm's total compensation paid by the seller shall be 2.5. So this overrides what's in the listing. Here's a really important thing to be aware of with this second line. It says, buyers obligated to pay buyer's brokerage firm commission as a condition of a buyer's representation agreement between buyer's broker firm and buyer. In my opinion, my interpretation of this is you cannot really use that unless you have a buyer's agency agreement. So again, Kim, feel free to speak up if you think I'm misinterpreting this. So here's a problem now. I'm actually pending on a deal right now where they offer 2%. I had already had the conversation with my clients about 2.5 or more, but 2.5 on the minimum. So when they wanted to write an offer on this home that was listed at 2%, I said, hey, they offered 2%, so we're going to use a Form 41C. But because I didn't have a buyer's agency agreement, what I did was at that point, I had them sign a buyer's agency agreement, which I'm about to get to. So
that's kind of where I'm looking at this.
That's what I would do. So that, because I think the buyer could potentially sue you.
Obligated is the issue.
Exactly. This seems very clear that you have to have a buyer's agency agreement in order to use this. The only other thing I can think of is you use a Form 34, which I don't like, because a Form 34 is us pretending to be an attorney, which we're not, and write it in by hand that says, seller to pay a buyer's brokerage commission of 2.5%, period. And you could do that. Again, Kim's managing broker, talk to her if you're ever going to put, not non-MLS wording into a Form 34, but that would be the only other situation. So my advice, if there is a listing that you have a lower commission than you have agreed with your buyer, at least agreed in verbally, they've talked to you, you've talked to them, they agree that we're going to include this in our offer, but you don't have a buyer's agency agreement, which I still don't do with my buyers, which we can talk about later, then at that time, you will get a Form 41 and fill this out with your client. And if your client doesn't want to commit to a full buyer's agency agreement, you could literally just write here in the area the exact specific address. But at that point, you'd want to have a 41 if you're using a 41C. And this agreement is just between the buyer and the buyer's brokerage. So you don't need to include this with your offer, but I do believe you need to have it. And I think you would be liable if the buyer wanted to really start reading the forms. They could, I don't know if they could.
Can you go back to the 41C for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
So my looking at this, it looks like only the second paragraph requires you to have a buyer representation agreement.
Correct.
So unless you're going to use that specific paragraph, I don't see the need
Oh, I completely agree. No, I'm just saying this is just for the second paragraph. Thank you for saying that, because I thought I must not have made that clear. The first paragraph, if they're offering no compensation, that you don't need a buyer's agency agreement. The second one you do. So anyways, let me know if you have questions about that, or let Kim know, and we can discuss this more, but that is my interpretation. And we'll get hopefully we'll get a little more clarity. We're going to do another refresher Tech Tuesday on this before everything changes October 3rd. The third one's awesome. It's because I've seen people do it and they've just written it in a Form 34. And I like that they've actually had the attorneys at the MLS write the proper wording. But this is saying if you have a buyer that you want to credit part of your commission to their closing costs, you now have an option for that. You just use this box. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. It's pretty self-explanatory. And then the fourth one, it's kind of the same thing, but in reverse. You're saying, you know what, maybe it's a family member or whatever, and you're saying, yeah, I'll represent you for 1.5%, but maybe that family member wants to, they have their closing costs. They don't need that money to go to their closing costs, but they want to use this to make their offer more attractive. So then you would use this fourth box that says, even though you seller have offered 2.5% commission, I'm reducing my commission to 1.5% because that makes my offer more attractive. Okay, so these are all things that I've seen people do before. They just now have boxes for it, which is super cool. One important thing to note is you need to sign this form. You, the buyer's broker, needs to sign this form. So this is not, most forms you don't need to sign except for like the 22J. So one thing that I thought of when I was preparing for this meeting is, how does this affect escalation clauses? And I don't have an answer. I called the MLS and I asked to speak with their attorney, and he said he'd get back to me because he didn't have time today. So I will get back to you on that. But specifically related to the fourth box, if I'm reducing my commission by 1%, hypothetically, that's kind of like a positive number on the escalation that increases your offer. So that makes it really trippy, because I could see people using the escalation clause incorrectly. And my guess is, I'm not that smart of a person. I'm pretty sure there's lots of people who are noticing this and seeing that this is going to be a major problem with escalation clauses. And my guess is a month or 2 or 3 after this is released, they update the escalation clause. I would bet money that they're going to update the escalation clause. At this point, I would say starting October 3rd, if they have not updated the escalation clause, and you are dealing with, if you're on the seller side and you're dealing with multiple offers with escalation clauses, and one of them has this, the fourth box checked, and they're reducing their commission, call Kim. Let's talk about a way to deal with it. But you want escalation clause are really scary, because if you fill them out improperly, technically the buyer could get the home at the original price, not the escalated price. So it's really important you do it correctly. In my opinion, the best way to do it, if you're not sure about how to fill something out on the escalation clause, is cross out if I'm representing the seller, buyer's different. Cross out the escalation clause and just counter their offer and explain why you're countering it. And just like an escalation clause, include the other offer. Say, hey, we're just countering you at your escalated price because this other offer had this minus this plus this, blah, blah, blah. And don't do it as a counter as opposed to accepting their offer through an escalation. I know it's really complicated. So again, let's just table that conversation for now, unless anybody has anything to add. And just most importantly, starting October 3rd, if you have an escalation clause situation and someone's using this fourth box on the 41C, call Kim, get some advice on that. Buyer's agency agreement did change. This is not, it didn't change too much, but it's just it's really self-explanatory. It's just saying if buyer purchases real property located in the area during the specified time, the buyer shall pay a buyer's brokerage firm commission as follows. And you have it as minimum of 2.5%. And then it says, if the seller is offering to pay 2.5 or more, then the buyer doesn't have to pay it. But if it's less, then it either has to be negotiated into the contract, or the buyer has to actually pay it like additional closing costs. So anyways, that the buyer's agency agreement for all intents and purposes is the same. They just added a little more clarity for the buyer. I'm going to pause here and say, I'm going to really think about this form long and hard, because I've always not used a Form 41 just as a preference. I liked telling buyers, hey, I don't make you sign a buyer's agency agreement. And the reason I do that is if I'm not doing a good job, you can fire me at any time. And I like that. It was a good script. It worked for me. I would say that to buyers who were interviewing other agents, and they would start nodding. And they'd be like, yeah, I like that. He doesn't make me sign an agreement. That's awesome. I might change that. I might start making people sign a buyer's agency agreement, because I was kind of making people agree to everything that's in a buyer's agency agreement verbally, and verbally sucks. It should be in writing. And so I'm not saying this is for sure what I'm going to do, but I'm considering, when I have my initial buyer's consultation, explaining why I have them sign a buyer's agency agreement, and explaining, this is what's happening. Sellers are now sometimes offering less than 2.5%, and I have to protect myself. I don't work for free, talking all through it and saying, so I'm going to ask you to sign a buyer's agency agreement. With that said, just like when I represent a seller and they sign a listing agreement, I will cancel this at any time. You are not obligated to me. This is just so that we can use the proper forms if a seller is offering a lower commission. If you decide after a week or a month or 6 months that you don't want to work with me anymore, I will immediately cross this out and initial it and release you. You do not have to work with me. This is just so that I can be compensated when we find a listing if you still want to work with me. I think I'm probably going to do that. I haven't really decided because this is all really fresh. But that's kind of my opinion. What are your thoughts on that, Kim?
I like what you're saying. I don't.
Cool. Thanks. Okay, cool. Moving on.
Hey, Isaac, can I ask you a question?
Please.
So on that 41C, let's say like you brought a buyer to, you made an offer on a home, and the listing agent, they essentially 2% would come to me, but we have talked to the buyer that I'm representing and said 2.5% is like what I work for. So does that mean that when the sale closes, the seller pays, the 2% to me, and then the buyer is responsible for the 0.5%?
Yeah, good point. So, okay, so let me make sure I understand your question. So you write an offer on a listing that has a 2% commission, but you also have a buyer's agency agreement that says you're going to make 2.5, but you don't do the 41C. So therefore, there's a 0.5% that the buyer is now responsible for. That's actually a great question. I've never thought about that, because the Form 40. Let me pull up the Form 40. The Form 40, I don't believe the Form 40 has any place to put directions to escrow regarding if the buyer has to pay part of your commission. Because what would happen is the buyer's closing costs would go up by 0.5%, and they would have to pay it. But how do you indicate that? So the closing agent instructs the buyer. Kim, what are your thoughts? How would you, in that situation, deal with that? I suppose you'd probably just send the buyer's agency agreement that you have to the escrow office and say, hey, please add 0.5% to the closing cost for the buyer. And the escrow company would probably pay 2 commissions. They'd probably give you a 0.5% commission check and a 2% commission check from the seller. That's a great question.
I think this is something they're going to have to figure out, because I'm sure we're not going to be the only people asking this.
Well, and like I've also worked with, buyers that like were FHA and could barely put down, like they couldn't barely provide their closing costs. So if like I'm adding a 0.5% burden, then like, what happens?
Okay, I've got a great answer to that. So the answer to that is that is like as simple as a problem as you have a buyer who qualifies for 500, not a penny more, and there's an escalation up to, there's other offers that are up to 520. It's like, if your buyer came to you and said, well, what do I do? Respectfully, you don't buy the home. You can't.
Yeah.
So the answer is just, hey, you can't afford to pay me the extra 0.5%. So we just have to find a seller who's willing to do it, right? It's like you have FHA buyers, first time home, FHA 0 down buyers that need to have an inspection. And if a seller will not allow an inspection on their home, then it's just like, so you miss that home. Like that's just, so that's kind of the answer. And it sounds like a harder conversation than it is. I rarely ever have, not rarely ever, I've never had a buyer push back because I have this conversation at the time that they are hiring me. And I say, some sellers are not going to offer me a commission. Most do, but it's possible they won't offer me a commission, or they'll offer something really reduced. If they do that, we're going to include with our offer a Form 41C that indicates that I will be paid 2.5% commission. This does not affect you. You don't have to pay it. The seller is going to pay it. However, to be very clear, if another offer is the exact same purchase price and they're not asking for this, they're probably going to accept the other offer. So it's going to negatively affect the seller's bottom line, and therefore we might lose. But I don't work for free, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so are you okay with that? And I always end it with like getting them to verbally say, yes, that makes sense. We're good with you making at least 2.5%. Absolutely. So anyways, that's my opinion on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. The other changes are kind of strange. Again, this is kind of fresh for me, and I haven't had a chance to speak with the MLS attorney regarding this, but you don't need to use the MLS listing forms anymore. But the reason I'm really going to gloss over this is because they said, so brokerages are now able to create their own listing forms, but we're not going to do that.
I am really not okay with our own listing forms right now.
I know. So let me just clear this up. As of now, for the foreseeable future, we have no intention here at Realty One Group of changing the listing form. We're going to require everybody uses the standard Northwest MLS forms, so nothing's changed. So that's really it. If something changes on that, a year or 6 months from now, Kim will have an office meeting about that, but I highly doubt that. So anyways, that's it. Now I just said something that wasn't true. One listing form has changed, and that's the 1A. And I love the changes to 1A. This is so much better. One of the most common mistakes I catch when I'm reviewing people's documents in SkySlope is when people have a listing. And remember the old 1A? Well, I'll just pull it up. How it had, I'm just going to show you because this is seriously probably, sorry, I'm not picking on I'm not going to call any names, but you guys know who you are. There were just some agents in our office who it would just like every time they'd fill this out wrong, they were like, oh, sorry, I forgot. But here they would put 2.5%, and here they'd put 2.5%. How you're supposed to do it is this is the total commission 5%, and this is 2.5%, or 6 and 3. Really confusing. I don't know why they ever did it this way. The new way they do it is so much more clear. It's just very clear. The buyer's brokerage firm commission is 2.5%. Wait, am I on the right one? Nope, I'm not. Sorry. Here we go. The listing firm commission is this percent or this price. The buyer's brokerage commission is this percent or this price, right? So that's great. They just separated it out. There's no total commission, cooperating agent. It's just very simple. The changes that are also really cool. I love this one. Section 4AI. If the buyer is not represented by a buyer's brokerage, then the listing firm's compensation shall be X. This is awesome because I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but if you have a listing and a buyer comes knocking and they say, hey, I'm not represented by anybody and I want to submit an offer. And you say, great, I'd be happy to represent you. If you and my seller are okay with the dual agency, I'd be happy to represent you both. And the buyer says, no, I'm good. I can represent myself. They're for sale by owner essentially, but for the buyer side, the buyer, self-represented buyer, whatever. It's really annoying because you're like, you're not going to represent yourself. Like you don't have access to the forms. I'm going to have to do all the work. But you're also not going to be liable for them because you're not representing them, but you're still going to do double the work, right? You're writing the offer and then giving it to your seller. So then how do you go to your seller and say, hey, like, I don't represent the buyer, but I'm doing this extra work. Can you pay me more? Well, now I'm going to include this in my listing presentation. I'm going to say, if a buyer comes and they see my advertising and they want to and they want to submit an offer and not be represented, I will do that just for an extra 1%. So you don't have to pay the buyer's broker a 2.5% commission. It's going to save you 1.5%. And I would do it probably for 1%, right? Like if it's a $500,000 home, that's $5,000. I don't represent the buyer. It's not a dual agency. I am just going to kind of facilitate the buyer side and then continue to represent the seller. So it's actually better than a dual agency in many ways because you're not liable for the buyer's agent. For the buyer. With that said, you still have to give them the law of agency. You still have to disclose to your real estate agent. Anyways, I will stop that right here and then say, if you have a situation like this, unless you have experience doing this, I would encourage you to call Kim and get some guidance on it. So then section BI, 4BI, this is talking about dual agency. So this is another thing that I've seen people do many times. Craig does this actually, where he adds like an addendum to his listing docs that says, if I bring the buyer and it's a dual agency and the seller and buyer agree to a dual agency, instead of a 5% commission, it'll be a 4% or whatever. It can be whatever you want. And that's just saying like, hey, I'll represent you for 2.5 still, but I'll reduce my buyer's brokerage commission by 1%. So it'll save you 1%. Anyways, now they have a place to do that. So these are options that you can now include in your listing presentation to hopefully separate yourself from other agents who maybe are leaving those blank. So anyways, I actually love those changes. I think they're they make things very candid. I will say, I'm not going to reduce my commission if it's a dual agency. I think that is such a weird thing. Again, Craig's a super experienced broker and he does it. So there's obviously different thoughts on this one. But in my opinion, if I have a listing and I have a buyer and my buyer happens to be interested in that listing, like, why would I take a reduced commission? I'd rather my buyer then not buy my listing. I'm like almost incentivized to not have them buy the listing that I'm trying to sell, because I'd make 2.5% with a normal listing. So I don't get that. I think Craig just uses it to be attractive, to separate himself from maybe other agents who aren't offering that. But if it's me, I'm still gonna say, no, I make 2.5% even if I bring the buyer, because you don't want to disincentivize me from showing my buyers your listing, right? It doesn't really make sense. So that's just
I will actually kind of give a different viewpoint on this. I really hate dual agent. I think dual agent is a slippery slope. Now, that being said, I have done a lot of deals where I've brought the buyer to my listing, but I've always had the discussion with the seller as part of my listing discussion with them that it's possible I may bring the buyer, that I will not be representing the buyer, but I would earn that commission. And I've had this happen several times where I've brought the buyer, I have a discussion with the buyer, and there's certain things that I don't do for the buyer. But I don't like the idea of dual agent. How do you do dual agent? How do you truly be an agent for both sides?
So I staunchly and respectfully disagree,
But we do that a lot, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. In my opinion, it's not super complicated to represent a buyer and a seller, because your job doesn't change. You have to put on 2 different hats, right? So if I'm representing a buyer who wants to write an offer on my listing, okay, I've got a listing right now in Rainier, Washington. If anybody is interested, I've got no offers, and I am very interested in seeing offers. If I had a buyer who said, Isaac, I like your listing, and she just dropped the price to $535. Let's go see it. And I show it to them, and they say, wow, we really like it. Do you think we can get it for less than $535? I would advise them exactly how I'd advise them if I didn't have the listing. I can't tell them anything about my seller's situation. And this is hypothetical, by the way, this is not true, but they said, dude, we got to sell now. If someone writes any offer, we take it. I can't tell them that, but I can say, look, they've been on the market 21 days. They dropped the price to $535 a week ago. Yeah, they'd probably take less. It has nothing, I don't know that for a fact. And if I do know that for a fact, I can't say that I know that for a fact. But absolutely, if it was a different listing, I would say they have no offers. Like the listing broker told me, but in this case, the seller gave me permission to tell you we have no offers and they're interested in seeing offers. Of course, I'd write a lower offer. Okay, how low can we go? How low is the lowest they would take? I don't know that. And if I do know that, I can't tell you that. But if this was not my listing, I'd suggest we offer somewhere around 10 to 15 low and let's see what happens. Or we offer list price and we ask them to pay all of our closing costs. And then on the seller side, they can say, wow, Isaac, this is 15,000 low. Do you think they'll go higher? Well, maybe the buyer told me, Isaac, we'd honestly pay list price. We like it that much, but let's offer 15,000 lower. I would just tell the seller, I have no idea if they'll go lower or if they'll go higher. Even if I did, I can't tell you. But what I can tell you is 15,000 is a lot. I think we can meet them in the middle. I think we can offer, maybe something like 7,500 below list price and meet in the middle. So anyways, it sounds really complicated and it is complicated, but if you're an ethical person who's going to just follow the rules, think of it like, rules of a game. There's a lot of games that you play with your kids and stuff that you can cheat really easily and nobody would know, but you don't cheat. Like it's like that. Like, could I lie and put my license at risk? I guess I could, but if you do everything above board, you summarize your conversations in an email afterwards saying, so just to repeat, this is what we talked about and this is what you decide to do. And then you have that in case either party later says, hey, I don't think you represented me well. And you have proof that these are the conversations you had. And you've got, one side saying, no, he never told me that they would do this and blah, blah, blah. Ultimately, I agree with you, Kim. I'd like to never do a dual agency again in my life, but I'm not willing to refer my buyers to somebody else and get rid of and lose 75% of the commission just because like it's a scary situation. It's a scary situation, but I know I can handle it. And I feel like, the rest of our agents, you guys can handle it. Just be really above board, put everything in writing, be very careful and be very ethical. Don't slip up and say anything like, dude, they need to sell. Like, yeah, let's offer really, what would you do if you were blind on the listing side and vice versa? That's my opinion.
We're gonna have to agree to disagree on this. We can talk about it later.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is I won the argument.
If that makes you feel better for now.
It always does. Cool, guys. That's about all I got today. I obviously paraphrased a ton of this, so I really do encourage everybody to read through this. It's really not much. I mean, I prepared for this meeting for probably about an hour and a half total over the past couple of days, and it's not overly complicated, but I think it would be good for you to read this also because it gives you some of the reasoning as to why they made these changes. So if you have clients who are asking, well, why are they doing that? You can explain why. And really, to summarize, the reason they're doing this is just to be more candid. It's to make the buyer and seller realize, as they should, that commissions are negotiable. We are not entitled to a commission. Everything is negotiable, just like the price and the closing costs and the inspection and so on. And so they're just putting it front and center. And I wouldn't be scared about this. I would just encourage everyone to be really forthright with your buyers and your sellers as to how you get paid. And don't make money awkward. You got to be direct and explain, this is how I make money. So that's all I got.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this.
No problem. I don't know how to stop sharing my screen. What's going on? Okay, well, I guess we're just gonna leave it at that. Well, thanks everybody. See you all next Tuesday. Next Tuesday is gonna be an in-person meeting, actually, an afternoon in-person meeting. We have a lender, and I'm spacing on his name. Maybe Rachel, you can help me. He has a really cool loan product. I'm not gonna spend too much time on this, but it's a super cool loan product. I swear I'm not just saying this so you show up. I've never heard of a product like this. It's super interesting. And I think he's bringing food. So that's not enough reason. I don't know what it is. And of course I'll be there.
His name is Jeff Hag.
Jeff Hag.
Or Hog.
Yeah, I heard about this loan product at a mastermind I was at, and I was like, what? And then I called him and talked to him for like an hour about it and like wrote a crap ton of notes. And really interesting. It's really a good tool for investors. So anyways,
What
that's all.
company does he work for?
Rachel.
CMG Financial.
DMG.
Oh, so funny.
Yep. Cool. All right, guys. Everybody have a great day, and thanks for joining.
All right, have a good day. Thank you.
Bye.
Later, bye-bye.
Bye.